everyone knows the sad part. Pink Floyd lost Syd Barrett to acid and to whatever was waiting underneath the acid. That is the version you have heard. The tragic founder who burned too bright and flamed out, a rock and roll casualty with a sweet, sad soundtrack. I want to tell you the version almost nobody says out loud, because it is darker, and because it quietly explains everything else about this band. Pink Floyd did not lose Syd Barrett once in 1968. Pink Floyd kept losing him, deliberately, beautifully, for the next 40 years, and they built the most haunting catalog in the history of rock out of the act of losing him over and over again. Start with the moment that is too ordinary to feel like a crime. One morning in early 1968, the band is driving to a show, and someone in the car asks whether they should go pick up Syd. And someone else says, "Let us not bother." That is it. That is the whole execution. No vote, no funeral, no farewell. A founder erased by a shrug. A man left standing on a curb in his own life. They had already brought in David Gilmour, supposedly to cover for Syd on the nights Syd could not function. And on that morning, the temporary arrangement quietly became permanent. The man who had named the band, the man who wrote Arnold Lane and See Emily Play, and almost all of the first album, the man who was Pink Floyd in the only sense that mattered, was simply not collected. And here is the thing I need you to sit with. They were probably right to do it. He could not perform. He would detune his guitar on stage and stand motionless or strum one chord for an hour while the others tried to play a song around him. Keeping him would have killed the band. Leaving him behind was survival. But survival and innocence are not the same thing. And Pink Floyd seems to have understood that better than anyone, because they spent the rest of their lives composing the difference. Now I have to convince you of something that sounds like mysticism, but is actually structural. And once you hear it, you cannot unhear it. The melancholy that became their trademark, that famous Pink Floyd atmosphere, the slow ache, the vast empty spaces in the sound, the sense that something enormous is missing from the center of the music, even when the music is full. That is not a mood they chose. It is the negative space left by a removed body. Think about what their mature sound actually is. It is space organized around an absence. Richard Wright's chords hang in the air and do not resolve. They hover. They wait for someone who is not coming. Gilmour's guitar sings these long, grieving lines into rooms that feel just slightly too big and too quiet. The architecture of the classic Pink Floyd sound is the architecture of a house where someone used to live. They did not write sad music about Syd. They built a sad house in the shape of his disappearance and then moved into it for 40 years. This is where the deepest idea of this band hides, and it is the idea I want you to take away tonight. In the early days before the famous lineup hardened, Syd Barrett was not one of 4 functions. He was all of them at once. He wrote the words, he sang them, he played the guitar, he conceived the whole strange, whimsical vision, the lyric and the voice and the instrument and the concept living inside a single nervous system. He was the body and the mind and the color and the pulse, undivided. And that is precisely what could not survive, because no nervous system can hold all 4 of those at once for long without tearing. So when Syd collapsed, Pink Floyd did not simply replace him with another frontman. They did something far stranger and far more revealing. They took the impossible hole that he had been, and they divided it into 4 manageable men. Gilmour took the body, the voice, and the guitar, and the physical pleasure of pure sound. Waters took the mind, the concept and the words, and the refusal to let a record be merely beautiful. Wright took the harmony and the atmosphere, the color that was neither body nor mind. Mason took the pulse, the patient floor under everyone's feet, 4 functions in tension, the chemistry that made every great Pink Floyd record. And all of it, every bit of it, was an amputation. The band you love was born by cutting one genius into 4 survivable pieces. They are not the band that replaced Syd Barrett. They are the band that is what is left of him, distributed across 4 men who could each carry only 1/4 of the fire that had burned him alive. Which brings us to the most famous ghost story in rock music. And I want to tell it carefully, because it is too perfect to be invented, and it was not invented. In June of 1975, the band is at Abbey Road, deep in the recording of Wish You Were Here, working on the very song that is about Syd, the song called Shine on You, Crazy Diamond. A heavy bald man wanders into the control room. No eyebrows, no hair. Carrying weight he never used to carry. He stands there, and for a while, nobody in the room recognizes him. These are the people who loved him, who started a band with him, who left him on a curb, and they do not know his face. Then, someone realizes. It is Syd. He has come, by some unbearable coincidence, on the exact day they are recording the song Mourning His Absence. He brushes his teeth in front of them by jumping up and down, the story goes, and he asks when his guitar part is needed. And then he drifts out again, and most of them never see him again. Now think about what that scene actually is. They were not mourning a dead man. They were performing his death while he was alive enough to walk into the room and watch them do it. They had already turned him into a song, into a beautiful, marketable, immortal absence, and the absence walked in and had a body and brushed its teeth and frightened them, because the real Syd was an interruption to the gorgeous Syd-shaped hole they had built a career inside. And this is the inversion I promised you, the thing that turns the whole sad story inside out. We are told the tragedy of Syd Barrett is that he went mad. I want to suggest the tragedy is that he was right. He looked at the same machine the others looked at, the touring, the industry, the demand to be a product, the obligation to be sane and pleasant and reliable, so that the show could go on, and something in him refused. Call it chemistry, call it drugs, call it a fragility he was born with, but underneath all of it there is a refusal. A man who could not or would not keep performing once he had seen what performing costs. The other 4 did keep performing. They got rich. They got famous. They sold out stadiums singing about alienation, about lunacy, about the man on the edge, about brain damage and the dark side of the moon. And the dark side of the moon was sitting in a flat in Cambridge Painting Pictures and waiting for the royalties that, to their genuine credit, they made sure he received until the day he died. They sold the view of the abyss. He paid for the fall. Every record about madness was funded, at the deepest level, by a real madness they had escaped, and he had not. And the closer they got to greatness, the more clearly that greatness was lit by his ruin. So let me leave you where the music leaves me. Listen again to the long opening of Shine On You Crazy Diamond. Those 4 slow notes from Gilmore that everyone calls the saddest phrase in rock. We hear it as an elegy, a band grieving a fallen friend. But an elegy is something you sing about the dead. This is something else. This is a confession sung to a man who was still alive by men who had built their entire sound out of the space where he used to be, who could not recognize his face when it appeared, and who would spend the rest of their lives unable to stop describing the hole he left, because the hole was the band. What if Pink Floyd were never really a band that lost its genius? What if Pink Floyd with a long, beautiful 40-year sound a guilty conscience makes, when it has just enough talent to turn its guilt into something the whole world will pay to hear, and just enough honesty to know that it is doing exactly that. And never, not once, the courage to stop.